estate rewards action. I was speaking with a gentleman recently out at a networking event. We were having the typical conversation, what we do for a living, how we ended up at the event that night. He was polished, articulate, and confident. He talked about his years in real estate sales and the listings he had coming up. The common dialogue you'd expect between real estate professionals. At one point, almost as a sidebar, he mentioned that he wasn't in any rush to buy real estate, that he'd been close to buying a property more than once, years apart. Each time he pulled back because something didn't feel settled enough. He was waiting to see what the market did as we moved into the next buying season, since spring through summer is generally when real estate activity picks up. It didn't register as important in the moment. The discussion hadn't been around him buying a property at all. He wasn't asking questions or framing it as a personal decision. It came across more like a comment about the market timing we were in, not his own situation. In that setting, comments like that don't always land. Conversations move quickly, context shifts. You file it away and move on. And I did. In the next moment, someone else joined the group and the focus pivoted. But later, when I was driving home, I found myself replaying the conversation. I always find it interesting when an individual in a real estate aligned business doesn't own real estate. I find that bewildering. But what really stayed with me the most was how neutral he sounded when he said he wasn't in a rush. There was no frustration in his voice, no urgency at all. It felt less like he was describing a decision and more like he was describing the weather. And that's the part that lingered, because those moments aren't insignificant. They sounded unfinished. Most people approach their first real estate decision as if it has to account for the rest of their life. And that pressure alone can make waiting feel safer than choosing. That pressure doesn't come from carelessness. It comes from responsibility, from wanting to do this once and do it right. The problem is that real estate rarely presents itself in a way that feels settled. Life doesn't pause long enough for that. Careers shift and relationships evolve. Markets fluctuate. None of that waits for certainty, and it doesn't need permission to keep moving. So people end up in an in-between space, close enough to see what ownership could look like, but far enough away to feel protected from risk. Waiting starts as a decision. Gradually, it turns into a habit. Then it just becomes default. Real estate behaves differently than most people expect. It doesn't require readiness. It responds to participation, even when that participation is cautious. That idea makes people uncomfortable, especially if they've been taught that the smartest move is to wait until conditions feel ideal. A common phrase I hear all the time is, "I'm waiting until rates drop." So I'll ask, what rate are you waiting for? Lower than what it is now. Do you know what rate you qualify for today? No. What would that lower rate change for you? I could afford a better house. Let's put some numbers to that. I'll give you a hypothetical situation here. Just bear with me. Let's say you're buying a home with a VA loan. The loan amount you have is $300,000. The difference between a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 6% versus 5% is about $188 a month. That's usually where the conversation pauses. I'm going to wait. $188 a month is real money. Okay, but what if rates don't hit that number? Well, then I won't buy. So let me ask you this. Why does continuing to pay 100% interest in rent while your landlord builds equity feel more responsible than paying interest in the single digits on an asset you own, one that builds equity and leverage for you, all to avoid a hypothetical higher payment of $188 a month, about $6.27 a day, less than a fast food value meal in today's world. If rates do drop and demand surges, what happens next? Supply tightens, prices rise. That $300,000 home is now $350,000. Even at the lower rate you were waiting for, your payment is now higher than it would have been before. In this example, waiting didn't save money, it cost money. Ideal conditions are rare, and time really is money. Sitting on the sidelines waiting for the perfect moment can quietly become the most expensive decision of all, especially when you factor in missed equity, missed leverage, and missed opportunity. One concept nearly everyone seems to dream about is retirement. That chapter of life where time opens up again, where work becomes optional, where control shifts back to you. For some people, it's a beach and warm weather. For others, it's a blanket, a book, a fire, and a space to slow down. Different images, same goal. Freedom, choice, and control over your time. What's interesting is how quickly those visions get separated from the way people are taught to prepare for them. Because when retirement comes up, the conversation almost always shifts to paper assets, retirement accounts, mutual funds, 401ks, things that feel structured, official, and familiar. They're framed as responsible, efficient, low maintenance. And they matter. They do help people build something over time, but they're rarely questioned. Paper investments feel safer largely because they're abstract. You don't have to interact with them. You don't have to make decisions along the way. You can just contribute and trust the system.
Hey business owners, got a blog but no time for a podcast? The Blogcast by Name and Creative transforms your written content into a dynamic, listenable experience without the hassle or high costs of traditional podcasting. Your words, your message, our audio expertise, bringing your brand to life in the podcast world. Turn your blog into a powerful marketing tool today by visiting nameandcreative.com to get started.
Distance creates comfort, and comfort gets mistaken for security. What often gets overlooked is how much time those systems actually require to work the way people expect. Compound growth is real, but it's slow early on and heavily dependent on consistency and runway. When contributions start later, the margin for error narrows. Losses matter more, fees matter more, and losses can happen fast. Recovery, when it comes, doesn't follow the same timeline. There's also very little ability to intervene. You wait, you ride it out, you hope the math holds. That doesn't make paper assets bad, it makes them incomplete. Real estate does the opposite. It's tangible, it's visible, it produces income, it allows adjustment. Cash flow can change, financing can change, strategy can change. And that difference matters if the future you're preparing for depends on flexibility, not accumulation. Rather, not just accumulation. I see this play out in real life all the time. I worked with a woman not long ago who wanted to buy an investment property. She was self-employed. She owned her own home. Her income was solid, but not tidy. Cash was tight, and she wasn't even sure she could do anything at all. What she did have was a 401k from an old employer. Less than $20,000 invested when she was young, and then life happened. That account had been sitting there for almost 25 years. She also had an IRA she started much later. She'd been maxing it out for about 5 years, earning average market returns. She understood there would be penalties and taxes if she accessed those funds. What she also understood was that neither account produced income, neither account offered flexibility, and neither helped her solve for the next 10 years of her life. We ran the numbers carefully, we accounted for penalties, we looked at real dollars, not theory, and she decided to act. We got the deal done. Now she owns an asset that produces income. That income can help offset the payment. She can deduct expenses, factor in depreciation, helping her reduce her tax obligations. As equity grows, leverage becomes an option instead of a concept. There's a path forward now for her that didn't exist before. She was so pleased with the experience. I mean, come on, would you expect anything less? I was her loan officer on the transaction. I'm teasing, kind of. And she was thrilled with the outcome that she sent a referral my way. The gentleman she sent over had a very different situation. W-2, salaried income, long tenure at the same job. He was stable, predictable. His retirement savings were entirely wrapped up in a 401k with his current employer. He was still recovering financially from a divorce he finalized a few years earlier. Since he hadn't owned a home in over 3 years, he qualified as a first-time homebuyer again. On paper, his options were actually better than the woman's. He had lower down payment requirements, more favorable rate scenarios, but he didn't want to touch his 401k, even though it would have been a loan to himself. He also didn't want to pay mortgage insurance on the loan either. So he chose to wait, looking to save more money and work on building up his credit score as well as his bank account. I'm not saying he made a wrong decision. It was just different. Both individuals were responsible, both were cautious, and both cared deeply about retirement. But one now has an asset working alongside her long-term investment accounts, while the other is still preparing to start, and time keeps moving. The difference wasn't knowledge or discipline, it wasn't values, it was action taken when the details were still imperfect. Once people accept that real estate could belong somewhere in the picture, they stop looking inward and start scanning the environment. Hopping on the next trending topics, rates, prices, timing, headlines. Most of that noise misses the point. Markets will continually be in motion. That will always be the case. What changes is who's positioned to move with them. Generally, those positioned to move are institutions, like hedge funds and large corporations. Institutions don't wait for certainty before they act, while individuals are taught to wait until things feel clear, and that difference alone explains who stays in the game. Institutions plan for adjustment. Individuals are taught to plan for clarity. That distinction means more than any headline. What concerns me isn't that institutions invest in real estate. That's expected. They have capital ready to place and have no problems finding where to place it. What matters is what happens when individuals remove themselves from the equation entirely. Because when everyday people decide ownership is too complicated or too risky, that space doesn't stay open. It gets filled by someone else who is willing to participate now and adjust later. You can see it when neighborhoods quietly change hands, when rental rates rise while ownership shrinks, when the people living in a place are no longer the ones with a stake in it. That shift impacts pricing and long-term opportunity, not overnight, but gradually. People understand the headlines about corporations buying up real estate. What they struggle with is realizing they're trying to make a personal decision using information that was never meant to be personal in the first place. Most individuals don't need a perfect read on the market. They need help understanding how ownership fits into their situation with the resources they actually have right now. That's the part that usually gets skipped. This is usually where my role begins. Not when someone feels confident, not when everything feels aligned. It starts when someone says they don't want to mess this up. My job isn't to push people forward. It's to slow the conversation down enough to separate fear from facts. We're rarely debating whether the market is good or bad. We're talking about what control looks like, what flexibility looks like, what starting small could look like instead of waiting for perfection. Waiting to feel confident before acting often guarantees confidence never shows up. Confidence usually follows participation. I keep thinking back to the conversation at the event. At the time, I let it pass. It felt out of context. I didn't slow it down. Looking back, I see it differently. It wasn't disinterest he had. It was hesitation that didn't have a language yet. Those moments are easy to miss if you're not paying attention, because people rarely announce they're standing on the edge of a decision. They just describe their situation and keep moving. That pause matters. At the end of all of this, what keeps coming back for me is how much pressure people put on getting it exactly right. That pressure alone keeps people from starting anything at all. Most meaningful things don't begin with certainty, they begin with motion. Real estate works the same way. The first property doesn't have to match the end vision, it just has to exist. Once it does, options open up. Leverage appears. The way people think about money starts to shift. That's the part I care about. If you're new here, welcome to Invest in You. The whole point of this podcast is to create space for conversations around money, investing, real estate, and ownership to feel less intimidating and more honest. They say it takes a village to raise a child, so why go solo with your finances? That approach keeps a lot of people stuck. My name is Dena Glassco. I'm a residential and commercial loan officer with Nexa Lending. But more than that, I help people translate big financial decisions into something they can actually understand and evaluate for themselves. Because investing doesn't look the same for everyone. Neither does success. If this conversation stirred something for you, maybe not urgency, but awareness, that is significant. You don't have to decide anything today, but you don't have to sit on the sidelines alone either. If you want to talk through what participation could look like for you, or whether it makes sense at all, I'm always available for that conversation. Because every long-term outcome starts the same way. Someone decides to begin.